The terminal at Lindbergh Field was buzzing with the usual San Diego chaos. Travelers rushing to gates with overpriced lattes in hand, but I was just trying to be a ghost. Leaning against a cold window with my cap pulled low and a duffel bag that felt heavier than it actually was. My name is Jackson Ghostthorn, or at least that was the name on my civilian ID. Because the man the Navy called Commander Thorn, the guy they'd nicknamed the Iron Anvil after a dozen tours that, aged my soul by a century, had supposedly retired 8 months ago. I was heading to D.C. on Flight 412, sitting in 14A, looking at the desert floor from 30,000 feet and thinking about how much I hated the suit waiting for me in my bag. A dress uniform for a ceremony at the Pentagon? I tried to dodge 5 times. I didn't want the medal. I didn't want the handshakes. I definitely didn't want the memories of a high-altitude extraction in the Hindu. Gosh, that cost me the use of my left ACL and 3 of the best men I've ever known. Beside me in 14B was this corporate type, a guy named Miller, who smelled like expensive cologne and self-importance. Clicking away on a mechanical keyboard that sounded like a machine gun in the quiet cabin, he kept huffing every time my leg, stiff from 3 surgeries, bumped the armrest, giving me these side-eye glances like I was an inconvenience to his spreadsheet. Little did he know I was counting the exits and checking the tension in his neck. Just out of habit, about 2 hours into the flight, somewhere over the jagged red spine of the Mojave, the pilot's voice came over the intercom. But it wasn't the usual "we're beginning our descent" kind of drone. It was tight, professional, and had a tremor of excitement he couldn't quite mask. He told us to look out the left side of the aircraft because we'd just been picked up by a security escort, and when I pressed my forehead to the glass, there they were, 2 F-2, 2 Raptors, their silver-gray skin gleaming like shark scales in the high-altitude sun. The cabin erupted into a frantic mess of camera shutters and gasps, people unbuckling belts to get a better look. While Miller beside me started panicking, asking if we were being hijacked or if there was a bomb, his face turning the color of skim milk. I just sat there, my heart doing that slow, heavy thud it does when I know the world is about to shift, because I knew those birds weren't there for a routine patrol. My encrypted burner phone, the one that Dodd lets you keep if you've seen, too much vibrated in my pocket with a message from an old handler that just said, "The sky knows who's on board. Anvil, enjoy the ride." Suddenly the lead Raptor banked so close I could see the pilot's helmet, and then, through some patch, into the cabin's PA system that I'm sure violated a dozen FAA regulations. Voice crackled through the speakers, deep and resonant. "United 412, this is Raptor Lead, Lieutenant Colonel Silas Viking Vance," the voice said, and I felt a chill because Silas was a guy I'd pulled out of a burning wreckage in the Cunard Province back in 14. We've got a very special piece of American history in Seat 14A today. A man who thinks he can retire into the shadows after carrying the weight of this country on his back for 2 decades. The plane went silent, like someone had sucked all the oxygen out of the pressurized tube, and every head turned toward me, including Miller, whose mouth was hanging open so wide I could see his expensive dental work. Viking's voice continued, warmer now, telling the 160 strangers on that plane about the night in the Shahikat Valley when a certain SEAL commander held a ridge for 9 hours with a shattered hip so Medevac could get 18 Rangers out alive. He didn't use my full name, just the Anvil, but it was enough, and as I sat there, wishing the floor would open up and drop me into the clouds, the applause started low at first, then rising into a thunderous roar that shook the overhead. Bins thought the businessman Miller looked at me, then at my faded tactical boots, and the scars peeking out from my rolled-up sleeves. And he started stammering, apologizing for being a jerk about the legroom, his face flushed with a mix of shame and awe. I just gave him a tired nod, because how do you explain to a guy like that the hero he's looking at still hears the screaming of the wind on that ridge every time he closes his eyes? But the Air Force wasn't done with their tribute, not by a long shot. Because as we crossed into Virginia airspace, the Escort didn't peel off. It grew. 2 more F-35s joined the formation, then 2 F-16s from the National Guard, until we had a 10-ship formation surrounding our bowing. 737. It was a peacetime display of respect that was technically illegal and visually staggering. A wall of multi-million-dollar steel, honoring a man who just wanted to buy a quiet ranch in Montana and forget he ever knew how to clear a room. When we touched down at Reagan National, the pilot performed a soft field landing that felt like a kiss on the tarmac. And as we taxied toward Gate 12, I saw the fire trucks lined up there, lights flashing in a rhythmic blue and red pulse. They unleashed the water cannons, creating a massive, shimmering arch of water that turned the sunset into a fractured prism of gold and violet as we passed underneath. A water salute usually reserved for retiring captains or world leaders. Inside the cabin, people were standing up, not to grab their bags, but to form a corridor. An impromptu gauntlet of respect that I had to walk through to get to the door. A woman in row 6, maybe in her 80s, with a gold star pin on her lapel, reached out and squeezed my hand as I passed, her eyes wet with a grief I knew all too well, and she whispered, "My son never came home from Ramadi, but thank you for being the reason someone else's did." I didn't have words for her. I just squeezed back, my throat feeling like it was full of dry sand. I stepped out into the jetway. I expected a quiet gate, maybe a driver with a cardboard sign, but when I turned the corner, it was like a wall of dress blues and polished brass had been erected in the terminal. At least 100 sailors and Marines were standing at a rigid, breathless attention, their white gloves stark against the carpet. Led by Admiral Holloway himself, a man who'd pinned my first trident on me 20 years ago. The silence in that terminal was more powerful than the roar of the jet engines, and as I walked forward, my limp more pronounced now that the adrenaline was fading. Holloway barked, "Hand, salute," and the sound of 100 hands hitting brows was like a single, sharp crack of a whip. I stopped, dropped my duffel, and for the first time in 8 months, I felt my spine straighten, my chin lift, and I returned the salute with a hand that trembled just a little, acknowledging that you can take the man out of the teams, but you can't take the brotherhood out of the man. Holloway stepped forward, ignored the cameras of the tourists watching from the glass, and pulled me into a hug that smelled like starch and history, whispering, "You thought we'd let the anvil just rust away in private, Jocks? We need you, son. The boys at the academy need to hear from the man who survived the impossible." That night didn't end with a medal. It ended with a realization that my retirement was just a change of station, and 3 months later, I wasn't. On a ranch in Montana, I was standing in a classroom at Annapolis, looking at 60 sets of fresh, hungry eyes, teaching them that the most important weapon they'll ever carry isn't the rifle in their hand, but the heart of the person standing to their left. It's funny how life works. How you spend years trying to outrun your shadow only to realize that the shadow is actually the foundation you're meant to build on. But I still wonder sometimes if we give too much credit to the individuals and not enough to the machine that keeps them going. Did I deserve 10 fighter jets and a water salute for just doing the job I was trained for? Or is our society so starved for something real that we turn every survivor into a saint just to feel better about the world? I'd love to hear what you think about where the line is between honoring a veteran and turning a human being into a myth. Because at the end of the day, I'm still just Jocks, a guy with a bad knee and a lot of ghosts, trying to figure out if I'm a hero or just the luckiest man alive. Would you have stood up and clapped on that plane? Or would you have wondered like I did? Why we wait until the war is over to show that kind of love? Let me know in the comments. I'm reading them. All